Please welcome Steve Schwartz.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for being with us. We couldn't be more thrilled to have Governor Hochul here today, that she has taken the time to be with us. You know, if you think back in the aftermath of the pandemic, there was so much discussion about cities and are cities going to survive? And I think there was so much naysaying on New York City and New York State. And I think we can sit here today and say without question, New York City is back and New York State is back. Our economy is strong. This state is now seen as increasingly a high technology hub. And with the CHIPS Act that was passed as a place where chips will be manufactured in this state. And we very much thank Governor Hochul for her very strong leadership on that. We at Hearst are also so proud of our ownership of the Albany Times-Union and of the role that the Times-Union plays in this state and in all the surrounding communities of our state capital. I want to thank particularly our publisher, George Hearst, for his leadership. We are celebrating this summer the 100th anniversary of Hearst's ownership of the Times-Union, and we thank you. We couldn't be prouder of its role in journalism. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the editor of the Times-Union, a 25-year veteran of the newspaper, Casey Seiler.
Good morning, and I'd like to join Steve in welcoming you to Hearst Tower. For what I know will be a robust conversation. Speaking as a former State House editor myself, I am a strong believer in both the wisdom and the obligation of elected officials making themselves available to the press, and so I'd very much like to start off by thanking Governor Hochul for taking this time out of her busy day to have this conversation. Some other thanks, I'd like to thank the governor's staff for all of their work, our Capitol Bureau Chief and Managing Editor for Investigations, Brendan Lyons, who was instrumental in putting this together, and of course the outstanding team here at Hearst Tower who helped organize today's event. Your upstate colleagues are eternally in your debt. The last person to thank will be one of the next people on stage, Dan Clark, who in the 5 months since we relaunched the expanded Capitol Confidential newsletter has brought his expertise, his wit, and his strong repertorial voice to letting people know 5 days a week what is happening in New York State government and in our always interesting politics. It's a commitment that's important to the Times-Union in New York and as it is across the nation in all of Hearst newspapers. Now it can be told the idea to expand the Capitol Confidential newsletter was born in a discussion I had with Steve in which he posed the question as to whether or not there was, if there was a market for a product that went deeper, exploring what is going on in New York State government. I think that Dan has proven that out. And with that, please welcome to the stage Dan Clark and Governor Kathy Hochul.
Thank you. Governor, thank you for being here.
Well,
welcome
I'm
to
glad we
Hearst
coordinated
Tower.
our outfits so well.
Is this your first time at the tower?
It is my first time, and I had the great pleasure of walking through the Good Housekeeping kitchens and brought back fond memories as a child when I would grab the magazine before my mother did and read all the articles and see it on digital platforms now. So no, it's just fun to be here. This is great. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, of course. I've never been here either. It's the most beautiful building I've ever been in. I don't know about anybody else. Amazing. I actually want to get to your governorship in a second, but I want to start on politics with you because we saw some news last night come out that reported that Minority Leader Jeffries and Majority Leader Schumer had privately told the president that, if he keeps running, they're going to damage their numbers in the House and the Senate. So we're getting to this point where, more things come out. You've been a big surrogate for him. So I'm assuming you saw that news. What did you think about that?
No, and interesting how you define a private conversation.
Yeah.
Just an observation. I hope my private conversations are more private than those. But no, first of all, let me thank people for inviting me here today.
Sure.
And to Steve, who I've known a long time. Thank you for your leadership of this community and this state in many, many different facets. And this organization is extraordinary. The Hearst Corporation, with thousands and thousands of people who call New York home, who are helping build our economy back. And I want to thank my friends at George Hearst. We've had a lovely get-together recently, and really, really impressed with how the TU is so engaged in the issues of the community, not just politics. Again, I live and breathe politics, but caring so deeply about the comeback of a place like upstate New York and the city of Albany, because it doesn't get a lot of attention. And so to Casey and everybody on the team, appreciate all you do. My senior team is here as well, my budget director, my secretary, the governor, my communications team. So they're the ones who I rely on enormously. One talent I do have is finding talent, and I believe I've found that in the individuals who are part of our team as well. So back to the question.
Sure.
What are we talking about? Is that a good deflection? Did we change the topic? Listen, these are fascinating, unprecedented times in American history. I have spent an enormous amount of time with President Biden, have celebrated incredible milestones for our state, whether it's the Gateway Tunnel, the largest federal infrastructure project in American history. He was there at the advent of that, all the way up to Syracuse, where we can talk about what Micron is going to do to literally transform the entire upstate economy in a very short time. So he's delivered for New York. He's delivered for our country. I believe in his vision. I was with him literally the day after the debate debacle.
All right, he came to the city.
He was in the city. He was at the dedication of the Stonewall Monument Visitor Center. It was great. He was on the stage with Elton John, energetic, exciting. With some days later, for an hour-plus long meeting in the White House with other governors, he had asked us to come just less than a week after the debate. And he was pressure tested. What are you going to do differently? What's going to go on here? This can't happen again. And but what he said at the outset, I don't think has changed, which is, I'm the nominee. I was selected through the primary process. I've been president. I have a record to run on, and I'm in it to win it. And I looked him in the eyes, and I believed he was sincere. As long as Joe Biden's in it to win it, I'm there with him. And that is my view. And I don't find it, as helpful, because every day we're not talking about Donald Trump. We get one day close to the election. We're not doing our job as Democrats to point out the vast, vast differences in the vision that our parties hold for the future. So I'd like us to get back on track in terms of that. Obviously, if there's a change, there's a change. We're adaptable. We figure anything out. But Joe Biden is our nominee. He's our candidate, and I'm with him.
Do you think you'd be disappointed if he decides to drop the nomination? I mean, depending on who the new nominee is, we have no idea who that would be, right? But would it be kind of a moment for you where you're like, darn, we lost my guy?
No. Disappointment is something I rarely feel. I mean, I'm adaptable, okay? I know how to handle vast circumstances. And so I believe he's going to stay. If he changes his mind, which I don't have any inside information to know that that's going to happen, I truly do not, then I'm lockstep with our nominee. I'm a Democrat who believes that our vision for the future sets us apart from the vision of the Republican Party, which has already submitted their platform, not what they call their platform, but they call it Project 2025. And if you have not read this, please read it, but not before you go to bed, because you'll be left awake at night with nightmares, to realize what they're planning to do to our country when they seize the power. And yes, he knows a lot more about the machinations of government and then how to wield power. But what will happen with our Supreme Court, what will happen to our institutions, it is a frightening, nightmarish specter. And that's what I want to keep us talking about. With Joe Biden at the top, life changes, we adapt, we focus on those core values as Democrats of who we're fighting for and what will not happen to our country.
How do you navigate looking at this moving forward after the assassination attempts? You know, there's a lot of talk about toning down the rhetoric, talking differently. I don't really know what that means, to be honest with you, because in politics today, it's very combative. We're just kind of like arguing with each other all the time. And I understand using different language, but going from here to November, how do you make that point? How do you drive it home with people without making it seem like it's going to create another assassination attempt?
Obviously, that was a horrific day in our nation's history. And, you know, we pray for the victim of that shooting, and thank God that the intent of the assassin, you know, the perpetrator was not implemented, they're executed. I mean, it was horrible to think that someone would do what he did. And I'd like to note that he was holding a weapon of mass destruction, which is the common denominator to all of the mass shootings that have occurred in our country in the last 50 years. Getting his hands on a weapon, and no one knows the motivation yet. But for him to get that close to killing the president, the former president of the United States, is terrifying and never should have happened. So we heard both sides talk about condemning violence. Of course, you condemn violence. I condemn violence, whether it's an attack on a person or the attack on our nation's capital. You know, then when the Republicans talk about toning down the rhetoric, happened to flick through the news over the last couple of days, watching the convention. I didn't see a whole lot of evidence of that. I just want to put that out there. I did not see the evidence of that. But you cannot have language that is incendiary, that is an incitement to do anything harmful to another person or an institution. That is crossing the line. And even I'll point out that J.D. Vance crossed the line and talked about America's Hitler and other language that the people who are now lined up behind Donald Trump have said themselves. I mean, those are fairly inflammatory, laden language that is, one would call inflammatory.
Yeah.
So I would just say this. We'll always talk about the differences. We'll talk about the extreme views that one party has. And I can tell you I can spend the next 3 hours talking about the extreme views of the Republican Party, but this is not the forum for that, I don't think, unless you want me to. But you can't cross the line.
Yeah.
You cannot cross that line. And I would love to get back to a time when there was respectful discourse, and not just discourse. I am old enough to remember what collegiality was like on Capitol Hill. I was a young, impressionable attorney for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Orrin Hatch would come into the office, have a drink. You know, Ted Kennedy would come in, Bob Dole. We worked with everybody, and I worked as a staffer with Republican staffers to work on the last major immigration reform bill in our country, Immigration Control Reform Act of 1987. So I was in an era when Tip O'Neill would go over to the White House and watch a football game with Ronald Reagan. I miss those days.
That's
I
very
believe,
much not today.
Well, I believe that people are still capable of that. It's just the current occupants in some of these positions do not lend them. So Joe Biden's that kind of person. He really is. He comes out of that old school view of you can disagree by day, but at night, you're Americans, you can be friends and colleagues. And that's what's missing, but I think it's redeemable. I really do. I will never give up my confidence in the ability of our institutions to continue working.
For me, I think, like, over the past decade in particular, the line just kind of keeps on moving, right? As to what's appropriate that you can say in politics and what is inappropriate that you can say in politics. And that's where I look at it and see, how do we bring those lines closer together? How do we get back to that collegiality? And I don't know. I don't have an answer, and I don't know if you do either. It seems like it's so far off from where we were that this is almost just the new normal, like a Mad Max of politics, if you will.
The difference between that era and where we are now is social media.
Yeah.
Because the anonymity that people have for even being recognized, but able to be from a faraway place, and to either espouse views that you would never say to another human being in person, hopefully.
Yeah,
Hopefully their mothers and fathers taught them better than that. I knew how to watch what I said, but when you're in the social media universe, no one has any constraints. And I'm not just talking about politics. I'm talking about how students and children teach each other in school. I mean, I'll talk about mental health of young people any day of the week, because what I have seen is because of social media and how cruel it has become for one person to attack another, or what they're wearing and attacking their boyfriend. It is a constant bombardment of negativity in our political discourse and even in our schools and in our families. That's what has changed so dramatically. And I don't know how you put that genie back in the bottle, Dan. I really don't.
I don't either. And I actually, personally, I left social media a few years ago for this reason, because I had all of these people on my news feed, and it went from these are my friends and family to suddenly everything I post, there's a negative comment on, criticizing it for no reason. And it's kind of like this echo chamber too, because you'll go on Facebook and you'll only friend the people with your point of view. Totally fine, I get that. But then you're not getting any other information. So when you're challenged on it, you become very defensive because you've only been told one thing over time. So I totally get the social media aspect of it. And you've been doing work on this in your administration too. And your lieutenant governor has too, with the hate and bias initiative too.
Yeah.
With him in politics, as you know, you've answered this question before in the past couple of weeks, he came out and said the president should step down as the nominee. Now, moving forward, does that affect your relationship with him? Do you have to repair it? Or is that kind of a let's let bygones be bygones thing?
I have said that people are allowed to express their opinions. I just happen to disagree because I want to focus on defeating Donald Trump. But I have some advice for what you said earlier about the comments. Don't read the comments.
I don't anymore.
Don't read the. I mean, that's just why I'm in such a healthy place, because people are attacking me, and I'll have dear friends who say, "Oh, I feel so bad for you. I cannot believe what they're saying about you." I said, "Actually, I don't know, so please don't tell me." This goes back to when I was I ran for town board 30 years ago. I've been elected official for 30 years, and the only way you could hit somebody was at the local newspaper. And sometimes I'd read my little Hamburg Sun, and I'd open up, and my husband had gotten to it first, and like some letter to the editor was cut out. And he's trying to protect me then and now. He still won't let me read the comments. But you have to insulate yourself in journalism as well, I believe, because it can take you to a dark place sometimes. But we get through. We persevere.
Yeah, when I was a fact checker for PolitiFact, I used to get death threats all the time. Just emails of people who were upset that I wrote the wrong thing according to them.
No, that's frightening as well. And you talk about how we have to protect elected officials. Members of the media are very exposed because they will give their strong opinion. They're expected to give strong opinions, but in this environment now, I think that's something it is a risk. It is a risk when you say what you believe as a journalist. If you're giving an opinion or a certain angle you take in a story, I respect the integrity of journalism and institutions like Hearst, but also the Times Union. That's what I would, it's derogatory to some, but not to me. This is what mainstream media is all about, and it's supposed to be, and I don't want to lose that, especially as you mentioned, the echo chamber that people go into, that constant reinforcement of their views, never challenging them, or questioning or understanding where other people come from. I mean, I have to flick on Fox News once in a while because I have a lot of parts of my state, and I got elected in the most Republican district in the state of New York. I ran the DMVs. I'd walk into my DMVs and I put in television so everybody stopped being so anxious. I walk in, people watching Fox. It's like, wait, can I at least, give me a break. This is my DMV. So there are different points of view. That's all right. That's what America's all about. But also, you're right about the lines that cannot be crossed in politics and in journalism. And if we could have more filters, and I don't know how it works, but you mentioned what we're doing in social media with the young people. No state in the nation has gone out on this courageous journey that we're on, because there's a lot of opposition from powerful forces to say that the status quo is fine, and I say it's not fine. Have you talked to a teenager lately? I have been having mental health roundtables for well over a year, longer than a year. Going into classrooms. We were in a classroom this past week, as we talked about. Talking to the kids, though. That was with adults. I was talking to the kids. And they're, number one, still trapped in the pandemic. if you've talked to a young person, they think it could happen again tomorrow. Their sense of security was just ripped away from them, no matter whether they were a 6th grader or a 12th grader. They're not recovered from it. We've moved on. They don't have that resiliency built up in their young lives and know how to cope. So then they reflect back on who their friends were and their connections with human beings during the pandemic. It was all online.
Right.
It was all online. So they became so addicted, and at the same time, that was the emergence of social media companies literally intentionally making the algorithms addictive to pull young people longer, keep them held captive. And we told social media companies, and I introduced this last fall, and we got it through, and I just signed it into law. I'm really proud of this, that social media companies can no longer, unless a parent gives permission, and I'm not sure I'll meet the parent who gives permission, to allow their child to be on the receiving end of unsolicited algorithms that are addictive. Now, I'm working with the Attorney General on the details, but it is really important to me that we send a message that you cannot do this, and you also cannot collect personal information about teenagers or even younger and monetize them, because you're monetizing the mental health of our kids. You're capturing information that you use to bombard them with messages. I mean, if a young person wants to know about suicide, they're contemplating suicide, they might want to get some help. The word suicide is out there associated with them. Within seconds, they'll be hit with countless ways to commit suicide, not ways that they can get professional help or what messages that are more uplifting and take them out of that dark place. So we're saying leave our kids alone. I'm sure we'll get sued.
You haven't been sued yet. Is that a good
Yeah,
sign?
but that's all right, but I get sued every day of the week. I mean, just go ahead. I mean, since I became governor, being a lawyer is like a growth industry. But that's all right. That's all right. We're usually successful. Most are pretty frivolous. But I'm going to protect our kids. And the conversation we were having this past week is with cell phones, because how is this information penetrating our children's lives throughout the day if they're in school? Because they're sneaking the look at the cell phone throughout the day.
Yeah.
And we launched the conversation. I'm going to get more data from our teachers and parents and administrators, but I've already started, and they are wildly supportive of a statewide ban on cell phones. We're not there yet in terms of mechanics, how it works, more data I want to gather, but a lot of the school districts do not want to be the heavies.
Yeah.
And I said, that's my job. Let me take the heat. On any topic that I believe in, I will take that off your back. Just say, hey, the governor made us do it. And the conversation that I repeated at our press conference about the Schoharie school superintendent, 2 years now they've gone distraction-free.
Yeah.
No earbuds,
They have
no
to put them in
smartwatch,
a pouch, I believe.
and no cell phones.
Yeah.
He says the psychological impact was almost immediate. Young people started talking to each other in lunch again. They didn't want to be in study hall because they had nothing to do, so they started taking extracurricular classes and going to the library. He said, you would not believe how it changed every single student in our district. And I love hearing stories like that. It had to be hard to do. He said parents were opposed. Parents were opposed because they said, if there's ever a mass shooting, I want my child to have a cell phone. But then they brought in law enforcement who said, that's the last thing you want your child to be doing, is fumbling for their phone, contacting you, and not listening to the directions of the adults who will lead them to safety. And I thought, that's powerful. That's powerful. And one teacher said, she's a first grade teacher, that parents are sending first graders to school with smartphones or smartwatches.
Oh, yeah.
So they could be in touch with their 6-year-old throughout the day.
Oh.
I might have
What
been a
are they-
helicopter parent
yeah,
at
what
one
are they,
point, but that's next level. So let the kids be kids. Teachers are the adults. You know, let's get back to this old school view of the world where they should be learning, they should be playing, they should be emerging as well-adjusted adults, not ones who don't know how to interact with other people. And I'll tell you, as future employers, that's what you want to have. You want to have healthy, open-minded young people emerge from our school systems and not have people who need the mental health services that I now have to put in schools, because this has gone too far without anybody standing up and saying enough is enough, and I'm that person.
You know, this is all geared, as you said, towards mental health for children. When we sat down about 2 years ago, I had asked you at the time how you deal with your own mental health. Has that changed at all? You know, you're 3 years into this job now. How do you cope? Because, listen, I go to work and back every day and I'm exhausted. You fly from Rome to Manhattan to Buffalo in one day or something.
At least I'm not driving.
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to drive. I love what I do, Dan. I love what I do. You know, I just got off the phone with the CEO of Corning, who's doing great expansion in one of our great legacy industries, and they're so excited about what we're doing with artificial intelligence. Gen AI is opening new doors for Corning where they're going to be expanding even more. So it's an exciting era. And he was calling to thank me for what I'm doing with artificial intelligence. But he asked about local politics and national politics, and he says, how are you so optimistic? He goes, because you said, I said, we're going to get through that. We're going to be fine. I said, I've been through the wars. I've been there. I've been tested. And I've even raised teenagers and survived it. I mean, I feel I can do anything. And I love what I do every single day. But it puts my life in perspective. I am so blessed to come from a family that started in a trailer park. Very few people got out of that trailer park. I still visit it when I'm back home. And I'm lucky. And I've seized opportunities. I had the gift of good public education. And when I go to a place like Rome yesterday, and I meet a family literally sitting dazed on the street waiting for people to give them some food, a mom, a daughter, son, 1-year-old grandchild, who were in a trailer, it reminded me of my own parents, that the 130-mile-an-hour winds ripped off the platform and flipped, and they had nothing.
Yeah.
That puts life in perspective very quickly. I will never complain about negativity or someone did this or that. I'm lucky, I'm fortunate, and there's no job on earth I'd rather be doing than being the governor of the state of New York.
Do you know, when you think about where you started, your upbringing, you know, how does that affect your decision making? Because you have been, I think your life, you've gone from very different places to very different places, right? As you said, starting in a trailer park, now you're governor of the state of New York. When I write stories, I take comfort in the fact that I grew up in the middle of New York in Shenango County, a very poor community, moved to Albany, which is a, you know, very different place, obviously not as big and great as New York City. And I put that in my stories. There's a balance there. Do you see it the same way?
I do. And I've, for those who think she's from Buffalo, what does she know about New York? I became lieutenant governor, started running in 2014.
Yeah.
I basically moved to the city. I mean, I lived in a hotel, became best friends with everybody who worked at the hotel. They're wonderful people. When I got my apartment 6 months ago, I was sad to leave them. They threw me a party because I was one of them, you know, and I was respectful and I got to know them. But I've lived in this city. I've walked the streets. I take the subway. I put on a baseball cap, a ponytail, and a pair of glasses. Nobody knows who I am. I go to a diner almost every morning.
You don't have the seal on your shirt?
Nah, I'm good. I go, you know, Bing, this is like the first time I've been glad to be short. I can zip in and out of crowds and no one knows it's me. I really, you know, I go to a baseball game. I embrace the incredible energy of this city and this region and the smartest people gathering to do great things, and the philanthropy and the generosity of the people here is unbelievable. And what we build and what we're doing and the infrastructure we're investing in, all the projects, it's so exciting to me. Building housing, taking care of people who really need help. But then I go back up to Albany or I go over to Buffalo or I, you know, travel around the state. It just gives me the right perspective to know that it's not us against them. It's not upstate, downstate. We all have that proud branding of being New Yorkers, and we brag about it. And I brag about it all over the country and talking to other governors when we gather for other meetings elsewhere. So it's something I feel is a little bit of a challenge, but this is where you can have higher levels of understanding. If you bring people into a different environment and talk about your experiences. And when I go to the Bronx and I talk about, you know, growing up as, you know, in a place my parents used to get our clothes at used clothing stores, and Dad worked at the steel plant, and all of a sudden he was liberated from that when he got a college degree. Our lives changed dramatically. So I talked to them about how the power of education is so important. Let's invest in our kids. I'm in Brooklyn talking to young entrepreneurs who are so excited about starting out. I helped my family start a business. My mom wanted to start a flower shop in my small town, at a time when every other business said going out of business. It was the darkest time in upstate history. You talk about the decline of upstate. That's when my mom decided to start a new business with her daughter, the lawyer, who was going to figure it out for her. So I used to sit in that little shop praying that someone would walk in the door and the bell would ring, that there was a customer, and very few people came. She never made a dime, but she was happy. She wanted to employ, her mission, this is my mother, wanted to employ displaced homemakers. It's a fancy name for the women who were abandoned by their spouses, usually midlife, never had a degree because they've been full-time homemakers, and they had no future. My mom just wanted to, I don't need to make money, I just want to give people a job. So that's what I come out of. And there's more in common with people from New York City and the 5 boroughs and downstate and upstate than who realize, and I'm going to keep pointing that out. And my other mission is, if people will not support the Buffalo Bills, I can at least make them their second favorite team, whether you're a Jets or Giants fan. Right? So I'm making progress. There's a, don't laugh, but I found a Buffalo Bills sports bar. It's walking distance to my apartment. That's me sitting in the fall. So sports is a unifying factor. There's a lot that unify. We talk about how bad. There's so much that you have in common.
It's a lot of the same.
No.
It's a lot of the same culture, and I don't think that people realize that. It's just in different places, and it is different culturally. But as you said, we're all New Yorkers, and we have kind of the same stuff inside of us.
Yeah.
It's just how that stuff comes.
Yeah, and all of us have a responsibility to find that, and to demonstrate that, and not be so divisive. And I will fight to the bitter end on an issue I believe in. I always do, and it's part of being scrappy from a steel town, I suppose. And nothing daunts me, which is very helpful in this job. I don't back down. But on the other hand, I'm always willing to hear someone else's point of view and ask how they got to that point of view, like what drove them, what in their background, what brought them to that thought process. So I'm so optimistic about this state right now. I really am.
Do you find that when you have those conversations with people, depending on, if they're people in government, people wherever, do people talk to you differently now that you're governor versus lieutenant governor?
No, I think what I hear the most is, and I just heard this from someone I met yesterday, I'm called genuine. They said you're very authentic, because those who know me know I have not changed. I don't know why I would change. I don't think I'm better than anybody else. I'm not. I just happen to be in a different job, but we all contribute in different ways. My vision of public service is elective office. I've run through 15 campaigns, countless debates, countless media interviews, and that's a process. But everybody has a different way they contribute. Whether the police officers, I stood with Nassau County just a couple days ago to thank them for what they do, keeping us safe. I couldn't make the subway safety announcement yesterday. I was invited to go with Jana Lieber and the mayor, but I had to be unexpectedly up in Rome because of the tornadoes. Yeah. But those are differences you make. The National Guard standing down there, the police officers, the people who go off to work at their jobs as home health care aides. Everybody contributes to the state, but also to the betterment of society through their respective roles. I just happen to have a role that's a little bit unusual. There's only been 57 of us who've done it before. Not a whole lot of women, but.
I mean, there's only one of you and 19 million of us, I guess. I want to ask you about congestion pricing, because we're kind of getting close to the end of the hour, but this was the #1 requested thing that I talked to you about, congestion pricing. What I'm curious about, take me in the moment when you decided that you wanted to put it on an indefinite pause, because I assume it was during a meeting or maybe you were talking to somebody. When did that switch flip?
I also absorb a lot of information.
Yeah.
Many sources, whether I'm reading reports, statistics, what's behind a study, what's behind a decision. There's also the human side of intelligence gathering, which I'm very good at. And as it got closer, people started getting more anxious. The anxiety level was getting higher among those who would be the ones who had to pay the $15. And I do a lot of roundtable. I talk to people and just look at the environment. Inflation is up. Cost of living is up. Stress in families is up. our desire to get people to come back from remote jobs or to come back to the city is intense. We have to do that as part of our recovery. Getting people back on the subway, and I can do all the press conferences I want or put out a press release that subways are safer than they've been since before the pandemic when nobody talked about subway safety.
Yeah.
It's down 11% lower than it was in 2019 when this was not the headlines of the news. So all this is going on. People are still feeling anxious. Prices are going up. And all of a sudden, as it's getting closer, people's anxiety level starts getting higher. And I'm looking back and saying, at what point do we just say, let's not do this right now? Let's let people know we're listening to them. That we're not tone deaf to those who will be paying this price. The teachers who will be paying $3,800 more a year because they come in 5 days a week. They don't have an option. The hospital workers at NYU Langone, all of them would have to pay more. These nurses and aides have to pay more to go to their jobs. The hotel workers, I walked into a kitchen at the Sheraton when I was walking. I never get to walk in the entrances of buildings anymore. It's kind of, I hear they have beautiful lobbies, but I always come in through a back way.
This one's great.
It was a very nice lobby. But I walked into, after we made the decision, I walked into a room of people that were all dressed up, the hotel wait staff. They're going to go serve breakfast to 500 people. And I got a standing ovation, and I didn't understand why. And they said, thank you, because we would have had to pay this. We're coming in from Staten Island. We're coming in from here. So the voices that are the loudest don't support it. I understand that there's a lot of powerful voices who don't agree with my temporary pause. But I want them to know that this was not a wake up one day and just do something. But I could not wake up the day after and say I didn't try. I couldn't do that to the people of New York at this moment in time. So in the process, I'm spending an enormous amount of my time with my team, experts, talking about the objectives of congestion pricing. What were we striving for? 2 objectives. One is reduce congestion, but not just to have the streets more open and easier, more passable, but also the idea of reducing emissions in the process, right? I mean, that was the benefit. And we're continuing to forge ahead with our clean energy goals, and they're challenging. Again, the world has changed since 2019 when all these went into effect. And this is when the bail laws were done. This is when, the environmental laws were changed. This is when congestion, there's a pattern there that this is when the legislature shifted and there were different priorities and adopted by my predecessor. It was a different time, but I can't be caught in the past of 2019 and make my decisions into 2024, 2025 based on that, because a lot has changed. So we're studying ways that we can be reducing, looking at traffic patterns now and parking and where are so many of the trucks, the business coming from?
Yeah.
Everybody should just ask themselves how many times you have deliveries to you personally in a week that you, in the old days before the pandemic, would have gone out and got yourself. You would have walked to the store. You would have maybe not ordered one item at a time. If you were delivering, you'd order everything at once. So all of us and those who used to walk to get dinner and get takeout, you look like you're guilty. You're smiling.
Yeah, because I get like 6 Amazon packages a week. Is the thing.
But did you always get 6? Did you get
No.
Okay, so that's 6 drives to your house there.
Exactly.
Okay, so we all have a role to play to examine our own behavior, which is fine. But we want to reduce congestion. There are other ways in addition or as well. There are ways to deal with the environmental challenges. I mean, buildings are themselves the greatest emitters of greenhouse gases.
Right.
And we know that, and we're doing a lot on that strategy. But also money for the MTA. And does anybody seriously think that as the architect of the bailout program 1 year ago, when we saved the MTA, and I remember people saying, does she even care about the MTA? She's from Buffalo. I was like, I'm so sick of that. I do care. I understand it's the lifeblood of this region. We don't function. We shut down. And I cannot have the economic powerhouse of the state of New York shut down. It must be invested in, not just the maintenance, but also the signals. I have security cameras going on every single train, every single car. That'll be done by the end of the year because I said so. And this was supposed to be a many-year process. I said, no, it's going to be done sooner. And the infrastructure projects that I believe in, the Interborough Express, the logic of living in Queens and you want to go over to your job in Brooklyn now because both boroughs have changed so much, but you have to come into Manhattan first. Life has changed. The world has changed. So I want to get that connection done. I want to get the 2nd Avenue subway. A lot of conversations with my friends, Adriana Espaillat, who wants it to happen. We'll get it done.
Is that on a longer timeline, though, do you think?
We've been funding the MTA since 1910.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars. We somehow did it without a few months of congestion pricing. I don't know how. Miracle of miracles, but we have the ability to get it done, what we need to do. We just need a pause to assess the situation. Even you look at a place like London. Everyone, well, London did it. Well, London started at £5, not 15. So there's price factors. I'm not saying that's a path to go, but it may be. You don't know. I want to reserve all my options. And also London carved out the theater district.
Oh, yeah.
Because they didn't want to hurt what would be their equivalent of Broadway. They had it stop during different hours so people didn't stop people from the suburbs from coming into dinner. So you have to look at the ripple effect of decisions that seem great when you get everybody all on the same page, except everybody's not on the same page.
Right.
Very influential people who thought about this a lot are on the same page, and they happen to have access to very large platforms. But majority of New Yorkers aren't there.
I want to ask you about the climate goals that you mentioned, because there was an audit from the State Controller's Office this week that, to paraphrase, said planning hasn't been great with the PSC and NYSERDA, so we're probably not going to meet those goals by the times that they prescribe. Do you think, first of all, do you agree with that? And second of all, can you get that back on track, or do we need to rethink that timeline of those goals?
Listen, there's no one who comes out of one of the most toxic parts of our state like I did. I used to watch the pollution being dumped into Lake Erie, one of the world's largest freshwater lakes, and it looked like molten lava dumping out of the steel plant where Dad and Grandpa worked, went into Lake Erie. And at night, even by late in the day, the sky was orange. As a child, I thought the sky was supposed to be orange because the emissions from the smokestacks were so prevalent. That was my childhood. And again, just a little bit down the road from Love Canal. So that's where I grew up. I'm a staunch environmentalist. Yeah. I come out of an area, I'm amazed I'm still alive when I think about what I used to swim in that lake.
Yeah, that's what I was just...
We watched it. We didn't know any better. No one knew any better. We were breathing the air. We were swimming in the lake. We're eating fish on Fridays out of that lake. It was like, what were people thinking? But I thought about it a lot. And I'm hardcore committed to protecting our environment. Now, what the controller was talking about, I need a little more time to analyze what he was talking about, but a lot of what he was talking about predates my time, because when they talk about the data that was being used back when the Democrats took the majority of both houses and they came up with this plan, and the goals were based on information from that time,
right.
Not information that we were involved with. But that being said, it was the law. We followed the law. But that was pre-pandemic. That was pre-supply chain disruptions that have hurt everything from offshore wind to building transmission lines. But that being said, I had been governor maybe a month, almost 3 years ago. It was Climate Week, late September. And I had announced the largest clean energy projects in our state's history, with the Champlain-Hudson line coming down, hydroelectric power from Quebec coming down to power New York City, mm-hmm. as well as wind and solar coming in from the Catskills. Both projects were out there. No one was quite sure which was going to happen. I said we need to be doing both at the same time. And our offshore wind initiative, Sunrise Wind, just opened up. We did our groundbreaking for that. We're continuing to power forward. But there's some things that are out of our control, like we're preparing for transition to electric vehicles. What we're finding is the public's not there yet.
We can't afford them.
That's an area where we can have tax rebates. We have tax rebates to make it a little bit better. But we're not at a place where we are counting on that as really driving our energy goals in a certain direction as well. And if the public isn't on board, it's hard.
Yeah.
Our job is to have as many I'll say fuel stations, but they're not fuel stations, charging stations as possible. So we have to do that so people feel comfortable that they won't go a long way without being able to have a charge, except they do right now. We're not there yet. So those are just little snippets of the challenges we faced in meeting something that I would love to meet, but also the costs have gone so much. I now have to step back and say, what is the cost on the typical New York family, just like I did with congestion pricing? What is the additional cost to live here? And if you're a family with 3 kids living in upstate New York and your source of energy is oil right now, even natural gas, what is the cost of that transition to you? What is the cost? And I can't do things without knowing the cost on consumers and either educating them that they believe that this is the way to go because it's good for the future, or making it just go a little bit slower in a path. So we're going to get to our goals, but if we miss it by a couple of years, which is probably what will happen, the goals are still worthy, but we have to think about the collateral damage of all of our major decisions, as I've done in both topics we're talking about.
Yeah.
You have to think about the collateral damage of these decisions, or the collateral impacts. You either mitigate them, or you have to rethink them.
Was that part of your thinking on the New York Heat Act at the end of session? Because I know that almost came to the floor. I know that it was close to passing, but there were some road bumps. Some Democrats in the legislature didn't want it. It was rumored that your office was against it. How do you balance that piece of legislation? Because that seems to have really upset people that it doesn't get to move. Like that bill in particular.
No, but I also think it's important to know why it doesn't move. I don't control movement on the floor.
Right.
I control whether I pick up my pen when it's passed by both houses and whether I sign it or not. That's where I have the decision-making power. I said I was open to considering that. Yeah. But there is also something called, amendments, right? So there can be a great idea, but sometimes we just have to scale it back or make it more reasonable or not hurt this group as much as you're. So there's a lot of, this is what I'm spending my summer doing, by the way. How does the governor spend her summer? 800 bills are passed, 500 in the final weeks of session in June. So now my team dedicates themselves to now having to read every single word, analyze the cost, analyze the impact, make recommendations to me, and I have to read them all and make a decision. So that's why why do you wait till December? Well, because if you give me fewer bills, I'd be done in July. Last year, although I shouldn't complain, it's down from 1,007 last year.
Yeah.
But
I think you have 600-ish left.
Yeah, but usually the tougher ones. I mean, I can sign the ones naming a highway after a veteran any day of the week. Those are pretty easy. But the ones that really they cause debate, and sometimes even if it's unanimous with the legislature, but I still have to look at it as like, my first question is, who's anybody being hurt by this? And I don't know if that always happened. What is the effect of this? Is it good?
Yeah. I want to end with you. We have a few minutes left. I want to end with you on housing, because I told my editor and his editor that I wanted to ask you a question about housing, because I've been looking for a house for 3 years in the Albany area. And the legislature passed this short-term rental bill to kind of limit Airbnbs. But there's this other problem too, especially upstate. I don't think it's a problem in New York City as well, but upstate, there's this problem where a house goes on the market and house flippers and corporations snatch it up within 24 hours. And it's created this vacuum where people like me can no longer afford the homes because they flip them, they make them too expensive. Is that on your radar? Because you negotiated this landmark housing package this year with the legislature, and there wasn't anything in there on that, but I don't know if that's as widespreadly known.
Mm-hmm. The answer is one word: supply. If there was enough supply, if people, communities, decision makers throughout the state would have opened up the door for more housing to be built, you would be able to have a house by now. And that's tragic to me, because you should be able to have a house. That's the American dream that we were raised with, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more of an upstate. Here it's like if you can get out of your parents' basement and get your own apartment, it's the dream because of the cost, as everything is so much higher. But it's because communities are resistant, once people are in, to opening up the door to the others. And multi-family housing, which everybody has this image like, oh, that's the low-income housing. It's not.
I live in multifamily housing.
Yeah, multifamily means there's other people on the, I live in multifamily housing.
Yeah.
You're here and in Buffalo, okay? There's other neighbors. We're friends, we talk, take the elevator together. But the cost of home ownership is so prohibitive for young people, it's heartbreaking. It really is. But I'm trying, and I was out in Long Island talking about this, our pro-housing communities initiative, because I was told everybody wants carrots, not sticks. I gave them a lot of carrots, $650 million worth of carrots, to incentivize communities that, here's a pot of money that I know you all want. This is for your downtown revitalization. This is Restore New York. These are all the kinds of, it's the Long Island initiative, the Mid-Hudson initiative. All this money I put over here, only eligible to communities that have committed to building more housing with growth targets. At first, there were only 20 communities. And when I let word out to say, well, those 20 communities are going to do really well with $600 million between them, now we have over 100 have applied. We're certifying more and more all the time. So I'm working on that strategy, trying to incentivize the reluctant communities, but also even in the city. This is not your question because you're asking about housing upstate, but why are there so many barriers? Why was there even restriction on converting abandoned office space to housing? Wouldn't that make sense to have Midtown? I mean, kind of know now what's going to be filled up and what's not going to be. A couple of years after the pandemic, still not sure. But now we have office buildings that are not fully occupied. I get that. Why aren't we allowing that to be converted to housing? Now, here's the issue. It's a lot more expensive to convert that, especially those with large floor plans. So you give an incentive, right? You make it worthwhile for a developer to do that. But for some, in Albany, that is so taboo. What do you mean we're going to incentivize something like that to happen for rich people? No. so that's the challenge I have. I could have done even more. I was dedicated to doing more, but I have to work in the confines of compromise. So what we came away with, as you said, a landmark, it is extraordinary that we got as much as we did to incentivize developers for housing, but also break down the barriers, even the floor to ceiling ratios. I mean, there are restrictions there. I think there should be more transit-oriented development. If there is a train station in your community, why not take that parking lot that people leave their vehicle in all day and put up maybe a 4-story building, 5-story building? People can live there, nice restaurant on the roof or a swimming pool, retail on the first floor, and wedge in a few floors of parking. So you actually can double or triple the ability to park more vehicles. So I think about housing all the time, and I want to get to a point where someone like you has a choice that you can go around like I did when I was younger. Even though interest rates were 13% on my first house. So I get a little house. But that should not be a barrier to you achieving your dreams. And that pains me here in the state of New York. We're still working on it.
Do you think, and this is the last question because you got to go.
Said the last one was?
That $650 million in the pro-housing community initiative, do you think you'll do that year after year, or does that pay out over a number of years? I'm not.
There's still money in it. Yeah, I mean, I'll do that annually. All right.
Well,
let me check myself. Blake, my budget director, can I do that annually? Okay, all right.
As long as Blake says yes.
That's good to know. No, because I want to see if it works. I mean, everything takes time. I mean, I didn't get housing done my first go at it last year. And people didn't take note that I was the first governor since Rockefeller who took on housing, because it is a lightning rod in many areas. So I didn't get it done. I was declared a failure. She doesn't know what she's doing, can't handle the legislature, write her off. But you got to be in this for the long game. We started people talking about it. All of a sudden, it's now the topic of conversation, not just in Albany, but all over. And then you start going out into communities and start building support in Long Island, Westchester, upstate, and in the city in particular. Then you have to get the elected officials on board, and then you start moving people, and then you write some op-eds, and you get people. You just have to know how to work the system. And a year later, we have something that you've called a landmark piece of legislation. That's how you get things done. I don't have to create enemies in the process. I don't have to disparage people in the news. I've changed the culture of Albany in ways where I'm more respectful than they've ever seen to other electeds, particularly those who are in leadership positions.
Yeah, I don't think people are used to that yet.
No, and even getting along with the mayor of New York, like, oh my God. 2 years later, they're still talking, they're not fighting. What's wrong with them? But guess what? More just getting done. And to be able to give money to the city of New York to help with subway safety. No one would ever do that before, because like, well, that's your problem. You failed at that. Think of the past way it was done. It doesn't inspire confidence in people. People want to know that when we elect you, your job is to get along with everybody else we elect. That's what I believe. And that's what I'm doing. We're changing the culture of government here in the state of New York.
Well, Governor Kathy Hochul, thank you so much for being here, and a big thank you to Hearst for hosting us.
Thank you. All right.
You're all set.